For decades, the official story of the American Southwest has been, one of vast empty deserts.
Right, just sand and sagebrush.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just atomic testing, quiet Indian reservations, and that's it. The narrative seemed completely closed.
Like a done deal.
Yeah, a closed book. But there's this document, this sprawling firsthand testimony from a field investigator that reveals a completely different reality.
And it is a dark reality.
Incredibly dark. It speaks of a 1979 firefight taking place roughly 450 feet below the New Mexico desert. 66 American Delta Force soldiers dead. And the enemy wasn't human.
It is basically the ultimate curiosity gap, right? Because we have this extensive stack of field notes, scientific readouts, interview transcripts, all from an investigator who spent years tracking down the physical, scientific, and even photographic proof of this subterranean shadow war.
Yeah, and today we're doing a deep dive into all of it.
Exactly. We're going to be dissecting an incredibly dark timeline concerning the Dulce Mesa underground base, these massive black-budget operations at Area 51, and alleged off-world cover-ups.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but we're going to impartially ask what can be physically proven, what's pure speculation, and precisely where the official, comfortable narrative just completely breaks down.
Okay, let's stop right there. Because if an underground war actually happened, how could it possibly be covered up?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, are we talking about a Manhattan Project level of secrecy or something even darker? Hiding the development of an atomic bomb in the 1940s took, tens of thousands of people? And even that leaked eventually.
Oh, absolutely. There were spies everywhere.
Exactly. So hiding a massive subterranean firefight with off-world entities, how does that not make the front page of every newspaper on Earth?
That is the exact question we need to keep at the forefront of our minds during this deep dive, because the logistics of secrecy on this scale, it doesn't just require silence. It requires active, lethal misdirection.
Yeah.
It requires endless funding and these massive jurisdictional loopholes.
So, to you, listening right now, I invite you to just set aside your assumptions for a bit. Forget what you think you know about the limits of military secrecy, and let's step into this bizarre, deeply unsettling timeline of the Dulce Mesa.
We really have to start with the geographic coordinates because, honestly, the location is everything.
Location, location, location.
Exactly. The focal point of this entire investigation is the Dulce Arculata Mesa. If you look at a map of New Mexico, this mesa sits right on the Jicarilla Apache Indian Reservation.
Okay.
It forms a very specific geographic triangle between Lumberton, New Mexico, Farmington, New Mexico, and Durango, Colorado, which is about 60 miles to the northwest.
And this wasn't just some random spot picked out of a hat, right?
Yeah.
Like, the location itself is a massive clue.
A huge clue.
Because why a Native American reservation? Well, if you want to hide a black budget operation, you don't do it on state land where you have to deal with, state troopers or local county commissioners.
Or the EPA.
Right, or the EPA. You do it on sovereign tribal land. The jurisdictional nightmare of cross-coordinating federal military operations with sovereign tribal councils creates this massive legal blind spot.
It essentially creates a bureaucratic fortress. And it's within that fortress that the timeline in our investigation really starts, way before modern UFO lore took hold.
Decades before.
Right. The field notes introduce us to a man named Ed Gomez. He's a farmer, and his land was grandfathered in by the Spanish all the way back in 1886.
Oh, wow. So his family's been there forever.
Exactly. And the investigators' records point to this specific ranch as the true ground zero for the modern cattle mutilation phenomenon.
Right, starting in the late 1960s.
Yep, late 60s and stretching right into the 1970s.
And we need to be incredibly specific about what the word mutilation means here.
Yeah, because it's not what people think.
At first, you hear that and you think it's insignificant. You think of, coyotes or wolves or maybe some strange bovine disease. But the anomaly here is entirely biological. Over the years, Gomez lost nearly 500 of his cattle.
500? That is a massive number.
It's staggering. And the state in which these massive animals were found completely defies natural explanation.
It really does. The pathology reports detailed in the field notes are what separate this from a simple predator attack. These cattle were found frozen in running positions.
Wait, like mid-stride?
Yes. They weren't stalked and dragged down. It was as if they were zapped or paralyzed mid-stride, instantly rigid.
That is wild.
And then there's the surgical aspect. The eyes, the tongues, the jawbones, and the reproductive organs were just well, removed.
And the incisions were made with what the investigator describes as medical lasers. But wait, I have to ask, what does that actually mean?
It's a good question.
Anyone can look at a clean cut and say, laser. How do they know it wasn't just a very sharp scalpel in the hands of, like, a human cult or something?
Because of the cellular pathology.
Okay, explain that.
Well, when a predator bites, or even when a surgeon uses a standard steel scalpel, the cellular structure of the tissue is physically torn. Under a microscope, you can actually see the ragged edges of the cells that have been ripped apart by the blade.
Makes sense.
But the investigators' notes detail that the cells on these cattle were literally pulled apart.
Pulled apart.
Yeah. The extreme precision of the heat instrument essentially unzipped the tissue at a cellular level, cauterizing it instantly.
Oh, man.
But the most glaring biological anomaly, the detail that completely rules out any natural occurrence, is the blood loss.
Okay, hang on. This is where I have to push back a bit. Because a full-grown cow has, what, about 10 gallons of blood in its body?
Roughly, yeah, depending on the size.
So you're telling me that across 500 cows, someone or something extracted 5,000 gallons of blood?
That's what the notes say.
How is that medically possible out in the middle of a desert without a massive industrial surgical theater? Because if an animal bleeds to death naturally, the heart is pumping, right? It's trying to maintain blood pressure. As the fluid volume drops, the vascular system fails. The capillaries and arteries begin to collapse. The veins just flatten out.
Which is exactly why this is so terrifying. The notes specify that there was zero cardiovascular collapse.
Wait, none at all.
Zero. Which is completely impossible through normal means. To extract blood without collapsing the veins, you would have to replace the lost volume simultaneously with another fluid.
Like an IV drip on steroids.
Right. Or use an incredibly advanced hyper-pressurized perfusion pump that we simply did not have the portable technology for in the late 1960s.
So how did they do it?
Well, it was as if every single ounce of fluid was magically and instantaneously extracted from the cattle while their vascular systems remained perfectly intact, acting as empty, perfectly preserved hoses.
That is just deeply unsettling. And then, after this impossible blood extraction and laser precision organ removal, the carcasses were reportedly just dropped from a height back onto Gomez's farm.
Like they were just discarding them.
Just discarded. Like trash. So you have this biological anomaly happening on a massive scale, 500 animals. But this is really just the prelude, isn't it?
It is, just the beginning.
Because the event that changed everything, the incident that cracked the lid off the Dulce Mesa, involves a man named Paul Benowitz.
Yes, Benowitz is a huge figure in this.
He worked for a company called the Thunder Corporation, which dealt with high-altitude atmospheric research and electronics.
Benowitz enters the picture because of a crash. According to the testimony in our sources, a prototype bomber crashed directly into the Dulce Mesa.
And not just any bomber.
No, the documentation suggests it was an early prototype of what would become the B-1 or B-2 stealth bomber. But the critical explosive detail here is the propulsion system.
Right.
The investigation alleges this prototype wasn't running on standard jet fuel. It was powered by a plutonium pulse drive.
Let's unpack the physics of that for a second. Because a plutonium pulse drive is a massive leap from conventional aviation.
Huge leap.
We're talking about technology adjacent to Project Orion, which was a real declassified 1950s U.S. military study that looked into propelling spacecraft by detonating nuclear explosions behind the craft.
Which sounds crazy enough on its own.
Right. But a plutonium pulse drive implies a controlled, contained nuclear reaction, providing continuous thrust. It's essentially an atomic engine.
And if you have an atomic engine crash into a mountain, you have a massive radioactive disaster on your hands.
Oh, absolutely.
But the military's reaction to a crashed nuclear-powered bomber on an Indian reservation is staggering. They did initiate a massive public radiation cleanup.
No FEMA response.
No FEMA. They didn't clear out the surrounding towns. The notes say they just threw a giant tarp over it.
A tarp? You've got to be kidding me.
Literally covered it up so nobody could see the wreckage from the air, which, understandably, deeply angered the local Apache population.
I can imagine. So Benowitz lived in the area, he had the technical expertise through his company, and he starts investigating this crash.
Yeah, he gets curious.
And as he starts poking around, he begins getting heavily harassed by government agents. You know, black sedans, phone taps, the whole standard intimidation playbook.
Classic Men in Black style intimidation.
Exactly. But while he's investigating the crash site, using his specialized radio and tracking equipment, he starts picking up highly unusual readouts on his computer.
It's like Benowitz accidentally tuned his radio to a frequency that wasn't supposed to exist. And instead of picking up police scanners or local air traffic control, he heard the internal communications of a shattered government.
So what was he actually hearing?
Well, he claimed that he was intercepting some form of non-human intelligence and that these broadcasts were coming from deep inside the Dulce Archuleta Mesa itself.
Right, inside the rock?
Yes. He wasn't just hearing static either. He was decoding patterns. Over a period from 1976 to around 1987, Benowitz actually flew his own private plane over the mesa, mapping out anomalous heat signatures and alleged disguised entrances where he claimed craft were coming and going.
This is where the story shifts, right? From strange, localized anomalies like dead cows in a covered-up plane crash to a coordinated high-level conspiracy.
It scales up massively.
Because if we follow the logic of Benowitz's intercepted signals, they align with a much deeper, much darker timeline established in the investigator's master document. And this brings us to the alleged 1953 pact.
The 1953 treaty is the cornerstone of this entire narrative. The documentation claims that in 1953, a formal deal was struck between the highest echelons of the United States government and an extraterrestrial group.
The Zeta Reticulans.
Supposedly originating from the Zeta Reticuli star system, yes.
Let's talk about the logistics of a treaty like that for a second. Because how do you negotiate with an intelligence that doesn't share your biology, your language, or your ethics?
It's a terrifying thought.
The terms of this alleged treaty are incredibly specific, and honestly, they sound like a terrible deal for humanity.
Very one-sided.
The U.S. government supposedly allowed these entities to establish deep underground bases on American soil to conduct energy and genetic experimentation. In exchange, the United States military received advanced extraterrestrial ships to reverse engineer.
But the ships were just the hardware. The true prize, according to the text, was biological.
The DNA.
Right. The United States supposedly received the code to breaking the human genome. The complete mapping of human RNA and DNA structure decades before the Human Genome Project officially began.
That is a massive technological jump.
It is. And this allowed a splinter faction of the military to perform hyper-advanced genetic engineering.
So we basically traded the human genome for a few hyper-advanced chips and some DNA mapping.
Essentially, yes.
The investigators' notes even joke darkly that the aliens got farming rights to our planet for the equivalent of handing us a few Model T Fords.
That's a grim way to look at it, but it fits.
Right. We gave them a laboratory, and they gave us a couple of shiny toys they probably consider totally obsolete. And the crown jewel of this operation, the primary laboratory, was the Dulce Base, supposedly constructed right after that 1953 agreement.
The architectural specifics detailed by the investigator are just staggering, and they come from a compilation of interviews with 14 different eyewitnesses.
14. So this isn't just one guy making things up.
No, and these weren't just random people. They included military contractors and, chillingly, women and children who claimed under deep hypnotic regression to have been abducted and taken inside this specific facility.
Now, I know hypnotic regression is, controversial.
Highly controversial in the psychological community.
Right. But the consistency of the details is what we have to look at here. The base is described as consisting of 7 to 12 subterranean levels.
Massive.
Witnesses describe being taken down massive freight elevators, sometimes arriving through large, cavernous hangar vents hidden in the rock face and traveling down roughly 450 feet into the earth.
Let's just visualize that scale for a moment. If you calculate each level at roughly 20 to 30 feet high, which you'd need to accommodate industrial equipment and craft,
Right.
a 12-level structure going 450 feet down is the equivalent of a 40-story skyscraper built completely underground.
That is just hard to wrap your head around.
It is a massive, sprawling subterranean city, radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel from a central power source.
But building a 40-story skyscraper above ground takes years, thousands of workers, and massive supply chains. Doing it underground, in secret, implies excavation technology that melts or vaporizes rock rather than, hauling it out in dump trucks.
Exactly.
Because if you dug that out conventionally, where did the millions of tons of displaced earth go? There's no massive spoil tip next to the mesa.
Which points directly to nuclear-powered tunnel boring machines.
Is that a real thing?
Oh, absolutely. It's something we know the military holds actual patents for. Machines that heat the rock to a molten state and press it into a glass-like lining as they move forward, leaving basically no debris behind.
Okay, so they build this massive facility. They have their treaty. The humans are on the upper levels doing their genetic engineering, and the zeta reticulans are on the lower levels doing whatever it is they do.
Right.
But treaties built on secret tech and abducted citizens don't last. Which brings us to the tipping point. The timeline recounts that this tense arrangement held until 1979, when a profound disagreement took place.
A massive breakdown in relations. The U.S. military essentially realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered in their own facility. They demanded that the aliens provide them with actual deployable weapons technology, not just the propulsion systems of the ships.
And how did that go over?
Not well. The entities flatly refused.
And while this diplomatic breakdown is happening, the investigators' notes describe a horrific inciting incident. Human military personnel supposedly breached the secured, alien-controlled lower levels of the base.
Levels that had been strictly off-limits to humans.
Right. And what they find down there is straight out of a nightmare. The levels are strewn with the bodies of misbegotten genetic crossbreeding experiments. Vats of biological material mixing human and animal DNA.
It's horrific.
But worse, they found human beings, abductees, that had been bled entirely dry and discarded, matching the exact pathology of Ed Gomez's cattle.
Yeah, the realization that the entities were essentially using humans as biological raw material, coupled with their refusal to share weapons tech, it just completely fractured the alliance.
I mean, obviously.
The U.S. military brass supposedly issued an ultimatum: get out of our bases, cease operations, and get off our planet.
And the entities essentially replied, make us.
Exactly.
So the U.S. does what the U.S. does. They send in the tip of the spear. An elite Delta Force team is dispatched to the lower levels to clear them out by force.
And it results in a catastrophic, unprecedented failure.
How bad was it?
The text states that the civilian scientific personnel working on the middle levels were not evacuated in time. The subterranean firefight breaks out, and 66 Delta Force members are killed in action.
66.
Yes. The human scientists are left behind, trapped behind enemy lines at the mercy of these entities, and the base is entirely locked down and taken over by the extraterrestrials.
We really need to pause and seriously analyze the sheer, staggering logistics of this claim. If true, 66 Tier 1 operators dying in a single engagement represents the largest single loss of elite military life in a classified operation in American history.
Unquestionably.
And it is completely scrubbed from the public record. Like, think about Extortion 17 in 2011, when a Chinook was shot down in Afghanistan and we lost 30 Americans, mostly SEALs. The whole country mourned. It was massive news.
It was everywhere.
How do you lose 66 Delta operators under a mountain in New Mexico and the world doesn't blink? How do you explain that to 66 grieving families?
You do it through the architecture of classified compartmentalization.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, when an operator joins a deeply black budget unit, their official paper trail vanishes. If a mass casualty event happens, the military doesn't issue a single press release. They stagger the deaths.
Stagger them? Wait, you mean they fake the timelines and the locations?
Precisely. You tell one family their son died in a tragic helicopter training crash in Honduras. You tell another family it was a halo jump gone wrong off the coast of Okinawa, maybe a month later.
That's so cynical.
You fragment the casualties across dozens of unrelated, highly classified training accidents spread over a 2-year period. By the time the paperwork settles, no one connects a drowning in the Pacific to a mysterious firefight in a New Mexico desert.
Wow.
The compartmentalization ensures the left hand never knows what the right hand is burying.
That is incredibly dark, but, logically, it's the only way a cover-up of that magnitude functions. But for a long time, the investigator admits, this is all just a story. It's a terrifying narrative, but it's UFO lore.
Right, it's anecdotal.
How do you actually prove a 12-level base exists 450 feet under a mountain? You can't just point to cattle mutilations or hypnotic regression transcripts. To challenge the official narrative of an empty desert, you need hard, irrefutable science.
And that imperative for hard data brings the timeline to December 1989. The investigation dramatically shifts from gathering anecdotal testimony to conducting a massive, boots-on-the-ground scientific experiment.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It does.
Yeah.
The investigator teams up with a man named Jim Del Toso.
Now, Del Toso is no slouch. This isn't a guy wearing a tinfoil hat in a basement somewhere.
Not at all.
The field notes detail his credentials. He was a brilliant scientist, one of the inventors linked to the development of the Cray supercomputer. He invented forms of virtual memory for early computing, and he worked heavily on the AT&T video phone technology that first figured out how to send video packets over standard copper telephone wires.
He fundamentally understands data, frequencies, and digital translation.
Right, so this team, which includes Del Toso, a researcher named Joe Randazzo, Dr. Fred Bell, and the investigator, heads up to the Dulce Mesa in freezing 2-degree winter weather.
And their goal was unprecedented for civilian researchers. They wanted to run a deep Earth ultrasound on the mountain to map the subterranean geology.
How do you even do that?
To do this, they buried a network of transceivers into the frozen ground, powered by simple 9-volt batteries spread across the mesa to create an acoustic net.
But the most bizarre aspect of this experiment is the specific sound frequency they chose to pump into the Earth to generate the acoustic bounce.
Yes, the weaponized sound.
They didn't just use a standard ping. They used an audio recording of what is known in UFO circles as a Meyer Beamship.
It has an incredibly unique, complex sonic profile.
The notes break it down. 32 specific audio bands, 8 of them hypersonic, 6 of them subsonic, operating with a 278 RPM pulse. Dr. Del Toso had previously analyzed this specific sound recording and concluded that it would take a 32-track professional studio and $250,000 to fake that complex of a sound profile in the 1970s.
But the question is, why use that sound for an ultrasound?
Exactly. Why not just a normal sonar ping?
Because there was a psychological and biological warfare aspect to using this specific frequency. The entities inside the mountain, the Greys, are described in the source material as inferior biological entities.
Okay.
The working theory among the research team was that these beings possess a hive mind and operate on what they called a 3-chakra energy system.
Wait, what does that actually mean in a biological sense? A 3-chakra system? Are we talking about an alternative to a central nervous system?
In the context of the investigators' notes, yes. It suggests a biological framework that doesn't rely on a highly developed frontal lobe or standard brainstem for individual processing.
So how do they function?
Well, it's more like a clustered, simplified nervous system that acts more like a biological antenna, receiving instructions from a central source.
A hive mind.
Exactly. They lack independent thought, functioning almost like biological automatons or drones.
So the team's logic was wild. They believed pumping this specific, highly complex, hypersonic Pleiadian frequency into the ground would act like an electric cat repellent.
That's a great way to put it.
The theory was that the hypersonic bands would violently irritate the Greys' simplified nervous systems. It would disrupt their antenna, causing a massive biological headache, hoping to either kill them, drive them out to the surface, or provoke an active response.
It's basically like using active sonar in a submarine, but through solid rock, and the ping is designed to physically hurt whatever is down there.
So what happens?
They ran this sonic pulse deep into the mesa and collected the interactive acoustic feedback data as it bounced back up to the transceivers. Then they took that raw data and processed it using 75 hours of Cray supercomputer time at the University of Arizona.
That is a massive amount of processing power for 1989.
Unbelievable amount.
The investigator claims that renting that kind of supercomputer time commercially would have cost nearly $50 million.
And the visual results they got back from that computation are the absolute anchor of their physical evidence.
The supercomputer didn't just render an image of a natural cave system or a lava tube, did it?
No, not at all. It revealed a highly organized, geometrically perfect structure covering a 10-square-mile block, 250 feet high from top to bottom, sitting roughly 450 feet below the surface of the mesa.
10 square miles.
Yes, but it wasn't just empty space. In the center of this rendered structure, the imaging showed a massive red glow.
A red glow. Meaning what?
That red glow in the data visualization indicated a massive active heat source, a central atomic reactor.
Wow.
And radiating from it were what the data called green penumbrae.
Why does a reactor emit a penumbra in an ultrasound?
In this context, the penumbrae were wash-offs indicating phase changes. When the acoustic hypersonic frequencies they pumped into the ground interacted with the massive electromagnetic fields generated by the reactor, it altered the return signal.
I see.
The computer mapped these electromagnetic distortions as green shadows. These shadows highlighted flat, artificial levels and a distinct causeway or transit railroad system running through the lower left quadrant of the base.
So you can clearly see the layout of an underground facility. But the absolute smoking gun, the piece of data that elevates this from a weird anomaly to a verified government cover-up, was the frequency of the power source itself.
This is the crucial part.
The ultrasound data measured the central atomic pile operating at an alternating current frequency between 400 and 480 cycles.
Specifically, it's centered dead on 440 cycles. We really have to explain why this is the definitive aha moment of the entire investigation.
Right, because to a layman, 440 cycles means nothing.
Exactly. The standard civilian power grid in the United States, the power running to your house right now, operates at 60 hertz, or 60 cycles per second. But 400 to 440 cycles is the worldwide military standard for aerospace and naval power generation.
Why does the military use a different power frequency?
Weight and space. Operating at 400 cycles allows the magnetic cores of transformers and motors to be significantly smaller and lighter than those operating at 60 cycles.
Oh, I get it.
In a submarine, an aircraft, or a deep subterranean base where excavation space is at an absolute premium, you use 400 to 440 cycles to make your electrical equipment as compact as possible.
So the supercomputer detecting a 440-cycle atomic signature proved that whatever was under the Dulce Mesa wasn't a natural geothermal anomaly.
No.
And it wasn't purely an alien construction either. It bore the exact, undeniable electromagnetic signature of a classified United States military installation.
Bingo. So they run this aggressive, weaponized ultrasound from December 17th to the 19th. They actively agitate whatever is down there. Then, on December 27th, 1989, the source describes a physically impossible event.
The escape.
A giant green fireball shoots out of the Dulce area. It travels between 13,000 and 30,000 feet in the air at an approximate radar-tracked speed of 15,000 miles per hour.
15,000?
It flies out over the Catalina Islands, makes a hard right-angle turn without decelerating, and vanishes over the Pacific.
Let's just be clear about the physics here. A hard right-angle turn at 15,000 miles per hour would subject any physical craft and any biological pilot inside it to hundreds of G-forces.
It would be lethal instantly.
It would turn a human to soup and tear conventional metallurgy completely apart. It implies a craft operating outside of standard aerodynamics, likely manipulating gravity itself to eliminate inertia.
And this wasn't an isolated observation by some lone camper out in the woods.
No.
The Los Angeles Times actually reported it on December 28th, running the headline, "Huge Green Fireball Flashes Across 4 States."
And of course, the Griffith Observatory officially claimed it was a meteor. But meteors are governed by celestial mechanics. They fall. They do not travel in a straight, level line at 30,000 feet. And they absolutely do not execute hard, 90-degree right-angle turns over the ocean.
It defies logic.
Furthermore, Fred Electric Warrior, the local Apache guide who knew the Mesa better than anyone, confirmed seeing this massive green fireball rise vertically directly out of the Dulce Mesa on the 27th, followed by a second identical one on January 6th.
And the ultimate consequence of this, the investigators' logs state that since that mass exodus in December 1989 and January 1990, there has not been a single credible UFO sighting or cattle mutilation at the Dulce Mesa.
It just stopped.
The hotspot went completely, totally cold. The base was seemingly evacuated or powered down.
But this brings us to a massive, glaring contradiction in the narrative. We have this highly technical, data-driven story of an ultrasound, a supercomputer, a 440-cycle reactor, and a mass evacuation. But running exactly parallel to this in the 1980s is the official counter-narrative.
A narrative aggressively championed by a man named Bill Moore.
Right. Bill Moore is a legendary, highly controversial figure in these circles. He was famous for releasing the MJ-12 papers, which allegedly detailed a secret UFO government committee.
But then, Moore publicly comes out and claims that he completely fabricated the entire Dulce Mesa story.
He just admits it.
He stands in front of researchers and says he made it all up, acting as a self-proclaimed disinformation agent for the government, specifically to prove how gullible the UFO community is and to muddy the waters.
Moore's disinformation campaign was highly targeted and brutally destructive, particularly to Paul Benowitz, the guy who first claimed to intercept the alien signals from the Mesa.
Benowitz was a prime target.
His life was essentially dismantled. The government agents, aided by Moore, fed him forged documents, altered his equipment, and basically gaslit him for years. When the investigator finally interviewed Benowitz in 1989, she was physically ill, a total recluse, and deeply clinically paranoid.
The field notes describe a really tragic scene. Benowitz was bearing a strange, square-shaped scar on his right wrist. He claimed an alien entity appeared at the foot of his bed, phased through the wall, and tried to attach a tracking device to him, leaving the burn scar when he fought back.
That's horrifying.
The psychological warfare waged on him was so intense that he was driven to the point of predicting a global invasion on March 12, 1993, by a faction of blonde aliens he called the Urantians.
The disinformation worked perfectly. It made him look entirely unhinged.
So we have more claiming the whole Dulce Base is a psychological operation, a hoax designed to ruin guys like Benowitz.
But this raises the ultimate question, one the investigator passionately argues against. If Dulce is just a fairy tale engineered to discredit researchers, how do you explain the crazed supercomputer data?
You can't.
How does a government psychological operation generate a physical 440-cycle atomic reactor signature under an empty Indian reservation? A lie doesn't bounce back on a hypersonic ultrasound.
Exactly. And even more compelling than the radar data, how do you explain the physical surgical evidence recovered from the abductees?
This is where it gets incredibly concrete.
This is where the investigation moves past the fluffy stories of hypnotic regression and introduces hard medical science. The source brings up the terrifying documented case of Alice Haggerty in New York.
The Haggerty case is the physical anchor of the abduction phenomenon. According to the notes, Alice was first taken at age 5 while suffering from severe diphtheria. She claimed she was placed in a glass tube on a ship, irradiated with a specific blue beam of light, and her diphtheria vanished instantly.
And then 2 years later, she was allegedly taken again.
Right. And again, you could say it's a strange story. But the investigator didn't just take her word for it. They procured the hard proof. Medical x-rays and MRI scans of Haggerty's skull revealed physical, anomalous objects.
Ball-shaped probes, complete with tiny hair-like antennas embedded deep within her head, specifically situated right behind her nasal cavity.
The visual description in the medical files is just striking. When a doctor put a camera up into her mouth to examine her palate, they could physically see metallic spikes protruding downward from the roof of her mouth, descending directly from these hidden probes.
And it wasn't just some local doctor looking at this. The investigation team took this medical imaging to the head of UCLA radiology.
A top-tier medical expert.
Not a UFO researcher at all. He looked at the imaging, looked at the physical spikes in her mouth, and admitted he had absolutely no idea what the material was, or, more importantly, how it got there. There was no entry wound, no surgical scars.
When they asked the radiologist how to remove them, his only suggestion was that they would have to completely cut her head open from the jaw up, likely using advanced laser surgery, just to access the area.
You cannot write that off as a disinformation campaign by Bill Moore.
No. Bill Moore didn't magically teleport metallic antennas into a woman's skull.
The physical reality of the technology forces the investigation to follow the money and the hardware. If the Dulce Base went cold in 1989 after the Green Fireball exodus, where did all that black budget money and subterranean tech go?
Did the military just stop their reverse engineering programs, or did they move operations somewhere more secure?
Well, from the subterranean depths of New Mexico, the field notes shift roughly 135 miles north of Las Vegas to Groom Lake,
Globally known as Area 51, Dreamland.
And this is where the investigator uses raw data to identify a highly specific, undeniable operational pattern, what the notes refer to as the Wednesday night protocol.
Tell me about this protocol.
The investigator and their team didn't just look at rumors, they took global UFO sighting data stretching all the way back to the 1942 Battle of Los Angeles. They ran this massive data set through a computer to look for temporal patterns.
And what did they find?
They found a massive, undeniable statistical spike. In the Northern Hemisphere, specifically between January 15th and April 30th, UFO sightings surged by nearly 80% on Wednesday nights, locked between the hours of 8 p.m. and 1:00 a.m.
The historical and logistical context provided here is just fascinating. Mythologically, Wednesday is Odin's Day. But practically speaking, the investigator's father, who supposedly flew SR-71 Blackbirds out of classified bases in the late 50s, explained the deep logistical rhythm of Black Project military testing.
Right. It runs on a schedule.
The base operates on a human schedule. The pilots and engineers would rest on Monday and Tuesday, review the technical specs, prep the airframes, and then fly their most dangerous, top-secret, highly experimental test flights on Wednesday nights when the entire team was primed, rested, and hyper-focused.
It's a rhythm of human engineering, not alien unpredictability. But maintaining this highly regimented testing schedule, building these underground bases, and funding decades of reverse engineering requires astronomical amounts of capital.
Where does it come from?
The source dives deep into the alleged financial architecture of these operations. They claim these projects are fueled by completely opaque, unlimited black budgets, entirely hidden from congressional oversight.
We have to talk about where that money supposedly comes from. And just a quick note to you, the listener, the documents take a massive controversial leap here.
They really do.
They don't just blame faceless bureaucrats for shifting tax dollars around. They explicitly point the finger at high-level intelligence agencies, specifically naming the CIA and political figures like George Bush, connecting them to global heroin and cocaine smuggling operations in the 70s and 80s. Now, we are obviously not endorsing those political claims, but we have to analyze what the source material states.
Exactly. And if we follow the logic of this accusation, regardless of its explosive political nature, it answers a fundamental logistical question. How do you fund a trillion-dollar base off the books?
You can't just ask Congress for $1 trillion to fight aliens.
No. But if an intelligence agency controls a shadow economy fueled by illicit narcotics, it creates a dark pool of unlimited capital that no auditor can ever track. The core argument the source makes is that with massive off-the-books funds pouring in, these classified cells within the government can operate 6 to 15 years ahead of the public sector.
They have unlimited resources, unlimited time, and absolutely zero political interference. And what are they building with all that money and time? The source names 3 specific terrifying crafts developed under the Aurora subprojects at Area 51. The first is Project Senior Prom.
Project Senior Prom is not a reconnaissance plane. It is described as a massive unmanned nuclear bomber designed to operate from space.
What does it look like?
Visually, the notes describe it as shaped like a large surfboard, rounded at the blunt nose, entirely flat on the bottom, tapering to a sharp point at the rear. The top of the craft is lined with launch chutes designed to hold 132 multiple reentry vehicles, or MRVs, each one capable of carrying a nuclear warhead.
But the chilling rationale for making it completely unmanned is what stands out. It wasn't just to save the weight of a cockpit. The notes specify it was to take the human conscience out of the equation.
A dark calculation.
If you need to drop 132 nuclear warheads from orbit, you don't want a human pilot sitting in the seat, suddenly having a moral crisis and hesitating for 3 seconds. You want a remote operator, miles away underground, pushing a button like a video game.
It's the ultimate detached weapons system. Then there is Project Senior Citizen. The investigator claims to have personally witnessed the specific craft landing at Area 51 in August of that year. It is an absolute behemoth.
The description in the notes is of a 700-foot-long craft.
700 feet.
That is more than 2 football fields in length.
Yeah.
It looks like 2 massive doorstops put together back-to-back, with a blunt nose and a cut-off, distended rectangular end. But despite its massive size, the source says it approached the runway traveling at a mere 50 miles per hour.
Which is aerodynamically impossible for a conventional aircraft of that mass. A 700-foot plane flying at 50 miles an hour would drop out of the sky like a stone.
It would have 0 lift.
The behavior indicates it was utilizing gravity fields. It behaved more like a silent, heavily armored blimp, manipulating the local gravitational field around the hull to essentially float, rather than relying on the air pressure of conventional aerodynamics.
But here's where the narrative pushes into entirely new, mind-bending territory. The investigator drops the most expansive claim in the entire document. Project Senior Citizen isn't just an experimental heavy bomber or a localized transport.
No, it's much more.
It's an interplanetary supply shuttle. And it's ferrying personnel, heavy equipment, and resources to 4 distinct United States military bases located on the moon.
The geographical precision of this claim is what makes it so striking. The source doesn't just say, the moon. They claim these 4 military bases are situated in highly specific craters. The Tsiolkovsky crater and the Van de Graaff crater, both located on the dark side of the moon, facing away from Earth, and the King crater and Tycho Brahe crater on the near side.
The source backs this massive claim up with an alleged off-the-record conversation with Dave Scott. Dave Scott was the Apollo 15 astronaut, the commander who famously drove the lunar rover on the surface.
An American hero.
Right. The investigator cornered Scott and asked him a simple question. Why was Apollo 18 canceled? The Saturn V rockets were already built. The funding was allocated. The crews had trained for years. Why just stop?
What did he say?
According to the text, Scott looked at him and muttered, because they didn't want us there. Whoever's up there didn't want us there.
To further support this alternative theory of our space history, the source asserts that NASA's entire public-facing operation is essentially a theatrical production. NASA runs on roughly 1.5% of the federal budget. The notes argue that NASA is merely a smokescreen, a PR department designed to keep the public engaged with archaic rocket technology, while the real space program, the black budget operation funded by those opaque trillions, is out there doing the real work.
Wow.
The investigator claims that the Apollo 11 mission actually photographed massive delta-winged ships parked in the Van de Graaff crater, images that were immediately classified and scrubbed before the public ever saw them.
It's a total paradigm shift. Think about it. If NASA's just the PR department launching tin cans, and the real shadow military is flying 700-foot anti-gravity ships to lunar bases every Wednesday night, it recontextualizes every single thing we see in the night sky.
It really does.
But somehow, incredibly, even a secret moon base isn't the most disturbing part of this deep dive.
No, the narrative reaches its absolute horrifying climax with a piece of evidence known as the Thomas C tape. This tape forces us to question the very biological nature of the aliens the government is supposedly interacting with.
Thomas C. was allegedly a high-level security guard who worked deep inside the Dulce Mesa base, patrolling those lower levels. In the late 1970s, right around the time the alliance began fracturing, he supposedly escaped the facility, taking with him a highly classified 6-minute security camera videotape.
This tape was heavily suppressed, but a copy eventually made its way overseas to Nippon Television in Japan.
The contents of this leaked footage are industrial and horrific. It purportedly shows a massive biological laboratory located on one of the lowest levels of Dulce. The grainy security camera pans back and forth across a cavernous hall. Lined against the walls are hundreds of embryonic breeding sacs.
The notes describe a grim factory-line industrial process. Extraterrestrial entities, the Greys, are supposedly grown in these tubes from genetic material until they reach roughly the size of a human hand.
Like farming them.
Once they reach that stage, they are systematically transferred by mechanical arms to much larger, floor-to-ceiling vats filled with a thick, glowing amniotic fluid, where they gestate and grow to full adult size.
And the footage allegedly captures adult extraterrestrials walking the laboratory floor, methodically checking the apparatus, adjusting the fluid levels, and monitoring the vats. The Japanese television network even created an ingenious, highly detailed physical recreation of the tape to broadcast, specifically to capture the purplish-violet glow of the laboratory lighting, which was outside the normal human visual spectrum.
This detail, the mass manufacturing of these beings, forces us to reconsider everything. The investigator explicitly raises a terrifying question in his notes. If these entities operate on a hive mind, a 3-chakra nervous system, and they are being grown in vats under a Mesa in New Mexico by the thousands, are they even an alien species at all?
Or what are they?
Or are they biological robots? Organic drones, cyborgs manufactured in an underground lab controlled by whoever or whatever is truly running that shadow government.
It's a chilling, fundamental proposition. Are we dealing with an interstellar invasion from Zeta Reticuli? Or are we looking at an entirely homegrown, highly classified manufacturing process of biological drones created using that mapped human genome they traded for back in 1953?
To try and synthesize all of this, to ground these massive theories, we have to return to the boots on the ground, the physical reality of investigating these sites in the American Southwest.
Right, because the investigator isn't just sitting in a library reading documents. They're out there in the dirt, probing the edges of these black sites. And the military response they document is intensely violent.
It's extremely hostile.
They describe terrifying physical encounters at the borders of Area 51. Chasing a bouncing, gravity-defying orb of light out into the desert at night, only to suddenly get boxed in by dark, unmarked military Broncos with light bars, heavily armed private security guards jumping out, laser sights aimed directly at their chests, screaming at them to turn around.
The field notes detail an incident where the intimidation escalated from threats to physical violence. A massive Sikorsky CH-38 transport helicopter allegedly descended on a fellow researcher's car on a public dirt road, dropping so low that it physically dented the roof of the vehicle with its landing gear in a blatant act of aggressive, lethal intimidation.
And then there is the deeply unsettling psychological aspect of the perimeter security.
This is the wildest security measure I have ever heard of.
The source describes camping on public land near the base. They fall asleep, and between 3:00 a.m. and 5:00 a.m., they experience horrific, incredibly vivid dreams of being abducted, paralyzed, and probed by gray aliens. It feels entirely real.
But it wasn't.
But later, heavily armed, deeply paranoid locals camping nearby tell them the truth. The military drives the perimeter roads during those exact hours and drops an odorless, aerosolized, hallucinogenic gas on the public campsites.
The gas is specifically engineered to induce those exact alien abduction dreams.
Think about the genius of that counterintelligence strategy.
It's brilliant in a twisted way.
If a civilian gets too close to the base, you gas them. They wake up terrified, go back to town, and tell everyone they were abducted by aliens. The public thinks they are crazy, their credibility is instantly destroyed, and the secret base remains perfectly secure behind a wall of UFO stigma.
So we must step back and separate the verifiable facts from the expansive fiction. What we know for certain, backed by physical reality, is that millions of acres of land in the American Southwest are completely locked down by the federal government.
That's a fact.
They are protected by lethal force, private security contractors, and funded by opaque, massive budgets that no one can audit. We know that highly classified experimental aircraft like the Aurora sub-projects do exist, and test flights happen.
And we know that medical anomalies, like the implants physically removed from Alice Haggerty, baffle top medical professionals.
But the deeper speculation, the Zeta Reticuli treaties, the biological cloning vats under Dulce, the 4 military bases on the moon, that remains unproven to the wider public.
Yet there is an ultimate glaring contradiction at the heart of the official narrative that we absolutely cannot ignore.
Precisely. If Bill Moore was telling the truth, and this entire story of Dulce Base, genetic treaties, and underground alien wars is just a massive, elaborate hoax designed to fool a few UFO researchers.
Yeah.
Why the extreme, lethal physical security?
Why are unmarked guards aiming laser sights at civilians' chests in the desert? Why are massive transport helicopters ramming civilian cars on public roads?
And most importantly, from a purely data-driven perspective, how does a government hoax generate a massive 440-cycle atomic reactor signature 450 feet beneath a supposedly empty Indian reservation?
It doesn't.
A fairy tale does not emit an electromagnetic penumbra that takes 75 hours of supercomputer time to render. You do not need a team of Black Ops guards, aerosolized hallucinogenic gas, and unmarked Broncos to protect empty dirt.
The evidence, the data, and the sheer scale of the cover-up documented in these field notes strongly suggest a second reality is operating right beneath our feet. A shadow infrastructure, completely insulated from democratic oversight, public knowledge, and standard scientific scrutiny.
Absolutely.
Whether you believe in genetic treaties with hive mind grays, or you just think it's hyper-advanced, classified military technology being hidden from the world by a rogue intelligence sector, the implications for humanity are staggering. We started this deep dive talking about a massive firefight under the desert in 1979, a war hidden in the dark, where 66 Americans died without a single flag draped over a coffin in public.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to consider. According to the timeline established in this testimony, the shadow military's technological capability is functionally 15 to 20 years ahead of the public sector.
Right.
If they had the capability to build a 12-level underground city in 1953, and if they were already flying hyperdimensional gravity warping 700-foot supply craft back in 1991, as this investigation claims, what exactly are they flying today? And more importantly, with unlimited funding and no oversight, where are they going?
Keep questioning the official story.